Welcome to Computers, Ethics, and Society. I'm Tom, and today we are talking about making decisions about technology. If you notice, we moved quite far ahead in the book, and the reason for that is that I think it's an appropriate time to kind of look at this issue, and that's the kind of general issue of technology. Um, and we are kind of looking at why technology is a unique topic or a unique kind of feature of human life and human interaction. And it has certain different qualities that you don't find in other kind of endeavors. So the way if you notice in my notes, the way I open this up is by asking anyone if they remember not having a cell phone. Now, some of us don't. Some of us do. When I was a kid, there were no cell phones. We just had landlines. And the reason why I bring this up is because I remember, when I was younger, that it was not an issue. There was not a need to be able to call someone at all times. There was not a need to check email because there was no email. But it didn't feel like anything was missing. It was not a technological advance. Smartphones were not technological advance that was on the horizon for many of us. Maybe some, but now that demand is there in full force, right? And if someone were to take away your smartphone for a couple of weeks, you would definitely notice that, right? And this is one example where a technology like smartphones starts to shape the way in which we engage in the world, the way in which we communicate with others, standards of communications, the level of communication, and that makes a significant alteration. It's also something that's very difficult to predict, right? This is not something, smartphones were not a super hot topic in science fiction films, right? They were really concerned to show that in the future that everyone would be looking at some device in their hands all the time. It goes to show a little bit about how technology is difficult to predict, and that technology can create needs and it can also create different possibilities, right? And those needs and possibilities tend to compound on one another. They add on top of one another, and you get certain kind of exponential advances in technology, and this can be very, very difficult to deal with in terms of trying to anticipate the consequences of technologies and so on and so forth, right? Anticipate the kinds of moral issues that will arise. It can be very difficult to predict. So one example of this is in the book. If you look at page 396, I have a bunch of really interesting quotes from people who are experts in their field, and they make wild predictions that are typically very off, right? There's one from Thomas Edison saying that he thinks basically electricity will be way too dangerous for people to use in like an everyday setting, which is obviously not true, right? He invented the light bulb, but he's a little bit off on that, right? Electricity's everywhere, right? And then there's a New York Times technology writer in 2006, it's not too long ago, and he says that Apple will probably never come out with a cell phone, right? And it was shortly after that the iPhone came out, and now Apple has, a good market share of smartphones, right? And so why are these people so off on their predictions? Well, it's not because they're stupid, right? It's because technology is very difficult to predict, right? We get surges and advancements, we get plateaus, we get all kinds of things. Things go in different directions that are accidental discoveries, things like this. So I ask, what kind of decisions do we make about technology? This unit is called Making Decisions About Technology. Why is that important? Well, we ask questions about, like, which technologies should we pursue, right? They don't just come out of thin air. We put time and money into pursuing different technologies, and some more than others, right? We might be more concerned with, say, robotics than we are with, studying DNA or something like this, or maybe vice versa. Maybe we want to halt space exploration and instead pursue, the deep sea, right? Things like this. You have to put money, time, resources into these things, and then there's also the question of how far you want to go into pursuing some kind of technology, and for what reason do you want to pursue those technologies, and oftentimes for us, the reason or the promoted outcome is, a big motivator for pursuing a technology. Um, and also there's always the question about who gets to use it, right? Some technologies are there, but they're not widely available, and so they become somewhat moot. Some things are made just for governments or for experts in a certain field. Sometimes, technologies oftentimes come through like military organizations and things like this. And sometimes we want to pursue some technology for some reason, and then we kind of find that to put in the time and effort and money to get the result we want is just too much, right? There are obstacles, and so these can be difficult questions to answer. And sometimes these questions aren't even really asked about certain things. So uh, in like I said, we have a difficult time understanding the consequences of technology. And like I said, this has to do with the fact that once you advance one piece of technology, this opens up certain possibilities, and which might not have been there before, and then you kind of pursue one of those possibilities, and that will open up more possibilities, and so on and so forth. So I give the example that they give from the reading that the original use for the computer was to calculate ballistic trajectories, right? Now today, a real concern in computing technology has to do with, things like big data harvesting and social media and things like this. These aren't even in the general vicinity of that original use of the computer, right? The kind of moral issues, ethical issues that arise with the original use of the computer are more concerns about, who can get a hold of that technology? Can your enemies get a hold of that technology? What if those ballistic trajectories are a little off? What if they don't account for certain features of the landscape or whatever, right? These are the concerns you have, right? The moral issues about like social media, I mean, that only comes after advance upon advance upon advance, right? That those concerns about social media are not even on the table with the original use of the computer, right? And they might not have even been on the table with the original use of advance of the internet, right? So it's not that you just can't, that you're not making good predictions. It's that it's a particular kind of like volatile trajectory to technological advances, right? And these advances, like I mentioned, are not oftentimes a deliberate decision. So, there is no kind of overarching committee of people who sit around and figure out what technologies we're going to pursue and where and when. Usually these kind of occur within kind of a capitalist society, and are pursued for, the advance of the idea of making a profit, right? I mean, like a startup is a good example of this, right? You make an app, and you think that it's going to have certain appeal, and so you pursue it a lot, right? And maybe that app turns into something else and ends up fulfilling some other need, and you just kind of pursue it because it's, you've already, I don't know, have gotten $2-3 million out of investors, and you need to give them something back, right? And then that application that you create might have some negative consequences that you didn't see, right? It might have an unintended use that people are taking advantage of, or so on and so forth. And you get a lot of different technological advances happening in this way. And technology has a certain kind of organic feature to it. It has a certain life of its own. It starts to just kind of go in different directions. And so this is yet another reason why technology is particularly unique, right? Now, once you start to recognize this, I do point out, and this is not in the reading, but in general, when it comes to technology and views on technology, there are at least like two major camps about how we should view technology. The first one I mentioned is instrumentalist view of technology. And this is the idea that technology should be viewed as like a mere instrument, right? We are in no way beholden to technological advances. We are largely neutral with respect to technology. It can be used for good stuff. It can be used for bad stuff. And we cannot use it if we don't want to, this kind of thing, and that it doesn't really influence our decisions a whole lot. Another opposing view is the what you might call cultural view of technology. And that's the idea that more or less technology shapes our lives in the way that culture might be thought to shape your lives, right? It creates certain norms, it creates certain habits, certain traditions, and so on and so forth about the way you do things. And because it does this, it really, really kind of creates possibilities, different categories, different problems, different solutions that did not exist before, right? And so it is a picture where you're more dependent upon technology, and that you need to recognize that dependency to really understand how we relate to technology, right? So those I just kind of want you to have in your back pocket as we kind of move forward and look at some specific issues. Now, the first issue that we will be kind of looking at specifically is the idea of AI and machine learning. Now, we will get into that in more detail, but I want to just raise this issue now because it really speaks to and highlights the idea that technology is particularly unpredictable, right? And the thing about AI is that it infuses technology with a kind of essential unpredictability, right? If you have something that has artificial intelligence or something that can operate of its own accord, right? A machine learning algorithm or whatever, that means that it can kind of perform functions, right? Um, Without us knowing how or what it's going to do, right? That's the whole idea of artificial intelligence. And so this kind of means that whatever kind of results you get out of AI are, in a certain sense, something that you really can't know what they're going to do, right? And two kind of important concepts that they highlight in the reading. First one is singularity. This is the kind of the point at which computers kind of surpass our knowledge, right? And then the idea of Moore's law. Moore's law is the idea that computing technology doubles about every 2 years or so. And why these are both important and why they're connected is that Moore's law is supposed to give us a way to predict when the moment of singularity will happen, and some people get really excited about this idea of singularity. um, but these are just, the reason why I highlight them is because they are concepts that kind of show us how technology can quickly get out of our hands, right? It's kind of like built into the idea of artificial intelligence. And so this is yet another reason to see why technology is unique, and it's going to be something that we need to consider when we're trying to apply, ethical theories and ethical evaluation to, issues that arise in technology. It's not going to be quite as straightforward as applying ethics to some kind of day-to-day scenario, right? There are unique consequences, there's unique trajectory. It's not always clear what kind of ethical paradigm to use, and what's going to give you a more accurate kind of rendition of what's going on there. So, anyways, that's it for this week. I just want to point that out. I hope this is a good introductory kind of module here, and we will be looking more into the specific issues in the weeks to come. All right, thanks.